Just doing a quick audio check. Can someone online confirm that you can hear us?
Yes, this is Nick. I can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks, Nick. I also wanted to check, Stephen Hoke, are you sitting in for Michelle Denton today?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, everybody, we're gonna go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the Fast Planning Technical Committee meeting. It is Wednesday, April 2nd and 12:01 p.m. For committee members I see present today, we have with us Michael Bradley, Nick Zarnecki, Stephen Hope sitting in for Michelle Denton, Kate Duber, Alexa Green, Brett Nelson, John Tardis, Bob Christash, Walker Ringstad, Lieutenant Mike Roberts, John Galligan sitting in for Kellen Spillman, RJ Stump, Jacob Toyrick, John Weinberger. The only two members I see absent at this time are Justin Burgess and Bill Rogers. Do we not see Bill Rogers in the meeting? Okay. We do have quorum. That's who we have with us right now for committee members, for Fast Planning staff, and myself, Jackson Fox, Olivia Lunsford, Corey DiRitoriano, Deborah Todd. And then for guests in the meetings today, I see we have with us Cody Luigi, Al Beck, Michael Luxon, and Sarah. Any other guests in the meetings today? I did not announce. Oh, Randy Bailey. Okay. Let's move on to approval of the April 2nd, 2025 meeting agenda. Can I get a motion on the agenda?
This is Brett. I had one.
You had one, you have a change?
Yeah, I was wondering, I haven't heard back
Brett,
from,
let's hold the change real quick. Let's get a motion on the table and then we'll consider a change after it's on the floor.
gotcha.
Move to approve. All right, motion made by Don Galligan. Is there a second? Walker? Okay. All right, Brett, go ahead. You had a change to the agenda.
Yeah, as far as I know, I think we might need to, move a 7C to the next meeting. I haven't heard back yet. If we're gonna be able to have a presentation on that.
Any objections from committee members on postponing item 7C to the May technical committee meeting? Okay, here no one opposed. We'll make that change on the agenda. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Anyone opposed to approval of the agenda as amended? Okay, hearing none. We'll consider those approved. Let's move on to approval of the March 5th, 2025 meeting minutes, which begin on page 2 of the packet. Can I get a motion on the minutes? Alexa? Didn't hear any audio there. Still looking for a motion on the minutes.
I move to approve.
This Alexa, I second.
Okay, I believe that was Brett and Alexa. Okay, any changes to the minutes? Edits? Okay, hearing none, anyone opposed to approval of the meeting minutes as presented in the packet? Hearing no one opposed, we'll consider those approved. Now moving on to our staff working group and chair report, which begins on page 9 in the packet. Starting out with our policy board meeting on March 19th. We did have a very long meeting with lots of motions and lots of amendments. It was about 3.5 hours long. To kind of give you a summary of the outcomes, the policy board did discuss retaining outside independent legal counsel to review the operating agreement edits and our issue with lack of approval of a new metropolitan planning area boundary. And they ended up deciding to postpone their decision on retaining legal counsel until their next meeting on April 16th. Some board members wanted to retain legal counsel just to review the edits, and provide a written legal opinion for the municipal attorneys to have. Other board members wanted to utilize that legal counsel to come to resolution with the state attorney at the table through multiple meetings. In my opinion, that would be an open checkbook for legal counsel and would far exceed our budget of what we could afford for that task. And other board members did not want to retain legal counsel on the topic. So it was a mixed bag at that meeting, and they postponed the April meeting to continue their discussion. There was also, they also discussed the call for project nominations for electric vehicle charging stations. They initially made a motion to pause that call for project nominations in consideration of the executive orders from the president and the orders from the transportation secretary flagging projects that invested federal funds into electric vehicle infrastructure. These funds may potentially be rescinded, but they are under review at USDOT in Washington, D.C. That motion to pause the call for project nominations failed. The board regrouped and asked that we go ahead and turn in the design phase or the project start for the electric vehicle charging stations and see whether or not it gets, the obligation gets accepted or rejected at Federal Highways. If it does get accepted, then we would issue the call for project nominations. If that obligation gets rejected, then we would reprogram the funding for this particular project to other existing support projects. So we are working this month to submit that obligation. And we'll see what happens. We should have an outcome by next month to see if that project advances. They also, the board also took up the comment letter that we drafted for STIP amendment number 2. And they made a few amendments to that letter prior to approving it. The policy board added a comment to highlight the inequity in regional expenditures of federal highway funds across the state. If you look at STIP amendment number 2, most of the investment is along in the South Coast and Southeast regions, with very little investment in the interior and rural communities throughout the state. So they added that comment to the letter. They also added language regarding our comment to coordinate our TIP amendment with the STIP amendment. And then related to the STIP's fiscal constraint tables that were not consistent with our TIP and other tables in the STIP narrative, the board asked that a few examples be provided in that letter. And we did add all of those changes to the letter, and it was submitted to DOT as our official comment letter for fast planning prior to the deadline. A copy of that, the final letter as revised, is included on pages 11 through 13 in the packet. They also discussed, the request from Max Transit to purchase bike racks for borough buses utilizing Fast Planning's undesignated fund balance. This will basically be coming from a 501c3 bank account. The board decided to approve that purchase, but to use federal funding, not our 501c3 nonprofit funding for that purchase. So that is now going to be rolled into our CMAQ and carbon reduction program funding table. And then with regard to Pearl Creek Elementary School access improvements, they considered reprogramming the funding for the construction phase to other existing scored projects, but postponed their decision until April. There was discussion about the recent actions with the school board and potentially making it a charter school and waiting on outcomes of the school district's budget as well as the borough's budget as well as the state's budget. So they felt like they needed a little bit more time to understand the fate of that school moving forward. In the meantime, I'm working behind the scenes on a scenario in which Pearl Creek construction is defunded and looking at reprogramming all that funding to other existing sport projects that are waiting for funding. And I had hoped to have that new funding table, that scenario to present to you all today on the agenda, but I've not yet completed my work. But it is looking very positive that the 6 projects that were recommended by the technical committee at our last meeting to utilize that funding for will all be able to be afforded underneath that program if Pearl Creek is defunded. Two other topics they took up. With regard to our policy board meetings, we do the day in advance have a pre-policy meeting. Typically, this is with our board chair and vice chair, as well as our borough assembly member, Scott Grass, attends those. The board did decide, albeit it was a split vote, to advertise those pre-policy board meetings, which occur the day before the regular meeting, to be publicly noticed. Basically, these are work session meetings on the agenda that allows opportunity for board members to ask questions that they may not necessarily want to ask in a public meeting, but now they will be publicly noticed starting in 2 weeks. They also took up the issue of our fast planning bylaws. The board chair felt that since it's been 5 or 6 years since they were written, it would be a good time to take a look at those and potentially make any requested revisions by any of the member agencies at the table. We do update that on an annual basis for minor issues that come up, so they're minor tweaks on specific subjects. But the board discussed a more comprehensive review than some of those incidental reviews. They postponed action on establishing a subcommittee to take a look at them until next month. But I went ahead and put it on the agenda for today to walk through the bylaws and see if there's any revisions that the technical committee would suggest to advance up to the board for the April 16th meeting. And that kind of wrapped up the policy board meeting. Again, in the packet, pages 11 through 13 is our official comment letter from Fast Planning and Stip Amendment number 2. Behind that, for your information, pages 14 to 15 is the comment letter from the Anchorage MPO EMATS. I've since received the comment letter from the Matsu MPO as well, but it didn't make it into the packet because I didn't receive it by Friday. But also locally here, there is a comment letter from the Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce, which is pages 16 through 19 in your packet. In case you'd like to see the comments that they submitted. There is actually quite a bit of content in their comment letter that relates to fast planning. So I do encourage you to review that. And then on page 20, in relation to our last bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee meeting that was held last Thursday evening. They did make 2 motions at that meeting. They decided to rename their committee to the Walk and Roll Advisory Committee, or RAC. But some of the impetus behind this name change is to be more inclusive of more modes of transportation than just bicycling and pedestrians. And to a company that they are requesting that 4 new seats be added to the committee for representatives from law enforcement, the school district, transit, and people with disabilities. So this these action items and the updates to their roles and responsibilities document will be brought before the technical committee and policy board for approval of this name change and additional seats at your May meetings. So again, it just missed the deadline to make it on the agenda for here today, but just to make note that that will be coming to you all in May. And I guess my last update, which is not included in the packet, so that the technical committee is aware, we did run into a little bit of a snafu with the match pool for West Tanana Drive out at UAF. And we're trying to sort out a path forward to get the match paid for that project underneath the FAST Improvement Program. The university does not have sufficient funding to cover the match for that. In the past, Fast Planning has used our state legislative funds to cover the university's match for that project. And part of the road is in DOT right away, but most of it is outside DOT right away on campus. Also, part of the road is in railroad right away, but we're kind of switching gears here to see if the state DOT will cover the match for this project location. And if the state is not willing to cover the match for that, I will bring a proposal forward to the technical committee and policy board at your May meetings for Fast Planning to pay for the match out of our 501c3 bank account. We do have sufficient funds to cover it. It's $60-something thousand. It's not a large, match payment. But the last thing we want to do is not have that project built here this summer. That's one of our most important projects in the FAST Improvement Program, and it is a road that is used by the community as a whole. It's not just for UAF. So we're working on that behind the scenes and hope to have a resolution in the coming weeks. And that concludes my committee working group and chair report. Are there any questions on those updates? None. We'll move on to our public comment period. Are there any members of the public that are wishing to provide testimony today and anything not listed as an action item on the agenda? If you'd like to speak to an action item on the agenda, there'll be a separate public comment opportunity at the time when we take that agenda item up. So any general public comments today?
And if you're online, just throw a reaction up, either like a hand raise or a smiley face or something to let me know you want to provide comment now or later.
Okay, no public comment in the room. I'm not seeing any online. So we'll go ahead and close the general public comment period and move on to old business item 7A. The federal fiscal year 2023 through 2027 Transportation Improvement Program Amendment number 1. Included in your packet, beginning on page 21, you'll see the newspaper advertisement for the comment period. We did post this on our website prior to the open of the public comment period, advertises the newspaper and on state and borough online public notice systems, as well as Olivia has been active on social media to try to engage residents and availability of the document. The public comment period began on March 3rd and will end on April 4th. Just to refresh your memory on the changes proposed for amendment number 1 on page 2022 provides a summary of changes, which predominantly include adding new highway safety improvement program projects within our boundary and significantly increasing or actually doubling the funding for the FAST Improvement Program, as well as the DOT's preventative maintenance program, as well as adding some funding to existing highway safety improvement program projects. We have received to date, as of today, 34 public comments. 33 of these are included in your meeting packet on pages 23 through 25. I would say that about 90% of the comments that we've received so far relate to the PD Nordale roundabout project. And most of the comments for that roundabout project are opposed, though there are a number of comments as well in support of the roundabout, but again, most are opposed. And then just for the technical committee's awareness, some of our local elected officials, their comments are included in here from Senator Myers, Representative Prax, Assemblywoman Haney. And all three of those are opposed to the roundabout project. So I believe that this will be a hot topic with the policy board at their April 16th meeting as they consider approval of amendment number 1 and whether or not to include this project in that amendment moving forward. So today, as far as the technical committee's action, I am hoping today for, even though the public comment period does not end until Friday, and we may receive some additional comments through the end of the week, I am looking for a recommendation to the policy board on approval of amendment number 1 and any further suggested changes that the technical committee has. And one last note, page 26. I do have a list of minor changes to the tip that were provided to me by DOT, as well as a couple of emails from various project managers on their projects to do some minor adjustments to project titles, scopes, and funding changes. Most of the funding changes that I've received don't necessarily result in an increase in funding, though some do open up a new phase, like a right-of-way phase or utility phase for a project. But all these minor changes, which could be captured underneath an administrative modification, will be wrapped up into the tip amendment, and we will reflect those changes in a different color so that it's easy to discern what we released for comment to the public and what was changed during the public comment period. Again, all of which are minor changes, but I am working on those. Been actually working on these all right here fast. So I'll open it up now for questions on the tip amendment, and then we'll go to public comment, and then I'll entertain a motion. So any questions from committee members on tip amendment number 1 this time? Talkative group today. We're all under the weather. Go ahead, Don.
Just a comment. Really.
Yes.
I understand that we have a lot of discussion here on this PD Nordale roundabout, if indeed it ends up being a roundabout. But I really feel like these are arguments that are made out of emotion and not necessarily based in with data or engineering substance, engineering knowledge. And, you know, I know I've heard at certain meetings, I can't recall if it was policy board or this body last month, but state police seem to like this project as a roundabout. And I think, you know, the proof of, you know, these people complain about the triple roundabouts that are already in town. But if you talk to anyone in the state police, they'll tell you the amazing crash reduction history these have created. And so I really feel it's important to get on the record that this should not be a vote. This should not be a vote based on how many people say they don't want a roundabout versus whether or not it is a correct way to proceed. And so I really think that, it's important to listen to folks, but I also think it's important to look at what the alternatives are and what, which is the most effective treatment for the intersection. That's it.
Thanks, Don. Do we have any questions before we go to public comment? Okay, not seeing it this time, so, oh, I see a hand raised. Yeah, Patrice Lee, we're opening up the public comment opportunity, and you have the floor.
You're unmuted, Patrice, or you're allowed to talk. You're not unmuted. Please unmute yourself. There you go.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I'd like to associate myself with the comments that were just presented by Don. I believe it should not be a vote. You know, I'll be honest, I wasn't thrilled about the roundabouts at Chena Pump Road, and they still have some challenges, but it is true that crashes and problems have dramatically reduced. And just like clean air should never have been put to a vote, public safety should not be put to a vote as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrice. All right, is there any other public comment today on tip amendment number 1? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the comment period. I'm now looking for a motion on tip amendment number 1. Just to refresh your memory, I'm open for a motion from the technical committee on a recommendation to the policy board to approve amendment number 1 after the comment period closes. And then committee members can make any amendments to that main motion that they see fit for any project and tip amendment based on the public comment that you see in your packet. Or you may want to not make any further amendments. So floor is open for a motion. Go ahead, Don.
And I move to recommend tip amendment number 1 to the policy board after public comment period closes. Move to recommend approval.
Thank you, Don. Is there a second to that motion? Jacob, okay. All right. Further discussion or any additional requested changes to the tip before it advances? Go ahead, John.
Can I change Chena Lake Recreation Area project for phase 2 in 2025 to be 375,000 instead of 220, and phase 4 construction to be 3.3 million?
So we don't need to do that as part of the tip amendment because it's within a program.
Okay.
And so I'm working on that change as I speak. I was working on it this morning to shuffle funding around within the program to accommodate that. But if Pearl Creek gets defunded, we have sufficient funding to cover that increase underneath the program. But it wouldn't actually result in a change to what you see in the tip amendment itself because it's a program with a lump sum dollar amount.
Oh, I'm good then.
Okay, thanks, John. All right, any requested changes to the tip amendment? So for PD Nordale, if this moves forward without any further changes, it will remain in the tip amendment. And just to remind you all, the technical committee did change the name of that project to the PD Nordale intersection improvements, I believe. So roundabout is not in the title, but the scope description still reads roundabout. So it will remain unchanged from the technical committee's original recommendation prior to releasing the stuff. Okay, last call for any requested changes. Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and call the question on the motion that was made to recommend the policy board to approve the tip amendment. Following to close the public comment period. I didn't sense any controversy in the room, so I'll just ask if there's any committee member opposed to that motion.
Thank you.
Okay, hearing none, we'll consider that motion approved. And we'll move on to item 7B, our congestion mitigation and air quality and carbon reduction program, air quality programs project list, which begins on page 27 in your packet. As I stated during my staff report, there's a couple of potential changes here. I've made the changes, but they're not reflected yet in your packet. But what I'm working with behind the scenes is a scenario in which the Pearl Creek Elementary Access Improvements, the construction funding for that project is removed and then programmed to 6 other projects that have been nominated to fast planning and already scored that are waiting for funding. The policy board, as I mentioned in my staff report, did not defund the electric vehicle charging stations. They're asking us to turn in the obligation for the project start to see what happens with that. But based on the work that I've done behind the scenes, again, which is not included in your packet, the 6 projects look to be easily afforded with defunding appropriate elementary access improvements. If I can remember what the projects were, I'll try to list them off. I know it's the UAF's compressed natural gas fueling station and purchase of compressed natural gas shuttle buses, purchase of additional compressed natural buses for Max Transit, and increasing funding for the North Pole High School access and circulation study, increasing that from 150,000 up to 300,000. And then funding some of the potential improvements out of the joint West Valley Hutchinson High School access circulation study. That the needs analysis for that and alternatives have been developed by the consultant team, and we are continuing to work with the school district and the school principals to narrow down that list of which improvements they would like to move forward with, and they'll actually have to nominate those projects officially to us. So that's something that will likely occur through the spring and summer. And then purchase of additional sidewalk snow removal equipment for DOT maintenance and operations. And initiating a design start for additional motor vehicle plugins at North Pole City Hall and the main parking lot at Pioneer Park, as well as based on a motion from the policy board to include funding to purchase bike racks that fit fat tire bikes for Max Transit buses. So that should be the full list there. So my intention is to have this before you at the May meeting, showing that if Pearl Creek is defunded, how all of these projects could get moving forward here in 2025 and or 2026. And apologize, did not have that scenario ready for you at today's meeting. So this is just an informational update. There's no action on this at today's meeting. But if there are any questions or discussion, we'll take that at this time.
The hand raised, buffer stuff.
Bob, go ahead.
Hey, Jackson, when you were discussing the snow removal equipment, I thought I remember something about City of Fairbanks getting some of that snow removal equipment, not just the DOT. Is that correct?
That's correct. We set aside 450,000. So for the City of Fairbanks, that would be purchase of a Boss Snow Raider mag with attachments and trackless MT7 articulated tractor.
Correct.
And
Thank you.
so that's already been funded for the city. So this would be an additional, say, 300,000 for DOT M&O for purchase of similar equipment.
I see. Thank you.
Welcome. All right, any other questions or discussion?
This is Randy. I have a question.
Go ahead, Ray.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on that, per the funding that is showing right now, the city of Fairbanks received, I believe it was one piece of equipment because based on the rates that came in for the piece of equipment for the borough and the city, there wasn't enough to purchase all three. So it may be a good idea to add a little bit more if the city of Fairbanks still wants that second piece of equipment. We can go back on some cost estimates and see what's required for the city to get that second piece if they're still interested.
Yes, please send me that dollar amount,
Okay.
because I'm updating this, this funding table, and, we do have excess funding that are actually 2024 dollars that are not yet spent, so we can accommodate an increase here. Just need it in writing via email.
Okay, thank you, Bob. I will work with you to get that if we still want that second piece of equipment.
Thank you, Randy.
Yep, thank you.
Any further questions or discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. Again, item 7C has been removed from the agenda. It hopefully will reappear on the May agenda for that presentation requested by the technical committee on fiscal constraint of STIF amendment number 2. But now we're moving on to item 8A, underneath new business, the memorandum of understanding for performance measure planning and target setting procedures. This begins on page 32 in your packet. So for background on this item, in regulation, we are to coordinate, we meaning fast planning and the other two MPOs in the state are to coordinate our target setting procedures with the Alaska DOT. Currently, we set targets either annually, biannually, or once every 4 years for safety targets, pavement and bridge condition, travel time reliability, and congestion mitigation and air quality for on-road mobile source emissions. As technical committee members that have been around year to year have seen, in particular, the safety targets, which are brought to us annually by the state. We do serve on a working group with DOT to establish those targets. And then each year, fast planning makes motions to either support the state's targets that were developed collaboratively or create our own for our area. So this is a procedural document and memorandum of understanding that is signed between the MPOs and the state that covers that process and how we coordinate with each other. This was first and initially signed back in 2018. But now that we have a new MPO in the state in the Mat-Su region, we need to add that party to the agreement. So this action item here today is simply updating the procedures and the memorandum of understanding to include that new party. And then one thing that we noticed was our targets for congestion mitigation and air quality are not included in the original procedural documents, so those were added. This is on page 34. So really, the changes that are being proposed to re-sign this agreement are highlighted there in that kind of peach color. But all other language remain the same. So we're just bringing this back before the technical committee and policy board, such that myself as executive director can sign the new agreement with the additional party and those other minor revisions. And I'll stop there and see if there's any questions. This is a pretty straightforward item. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions at this time, so is there any public comment on this item? Okay, not seeing any public comment, so at this time I'll entertain a motion. Recommended motion would be to recommend to the policy board to approve the updated memorandum of understanding for performance measure target setting.
So moved.
Thank you, Don. Is there a second? Second by Jacob. Okay, discussion.
Just seems like a minor administrative update,
It is.
very straightforward.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, anyone opposed to the motion to recommend the policy board to approve the updated memorandum of understanding for performance measure target setting? Okay, hearing no one opposed, we'll consider that motion approved. And move on to item 8B, review of past planning bylaws for any proposed revisions. The current version of fast planning's bylaws begin on page 46 in the packet. Again, this was discussed at our policy board meeting on March 19th with interest from some board members to do a review of our bylaws section by section to see if there's any updates that we all think that we should make to this. There was no specific updates to any of the articles in the bylaws that were mentioned at the policy board meeting. But I thought to help out the policy board that we might kind of go through this article by article at today's meeting to see if the technical committee has any suggestions for changes that we can provide to the policy board for insight on what you all think might be some good updates for them to consider. Even so, this is likely to come back to the technical committee in May for official action on any of the changes. So this is an action item here today, but I'd kind of like to prefer to do this as a bit of a work session first before any motions are made. We open it up for public comment. And so I think we'll just work through the articles kind of one by one, and then committee members can chime in with their questions or thoughts at any time before we advance this to public comment and entertain some motions. So I guess just keep track of any notes of the discussion on things that you all think might need to be changed. So Article 1 here on page 46, this just relates to our organization, stating that Fast Planning Policy Board is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Metropolitan Planning Area. And that all of our board and committee meetings are subject to the Open Meetings Act in Alaska statute. So any suggestions for changes to Article 1? Okay, moving to Article 2. This directly relates to the makeup of our policy board. As outlined in our operating agreement and in our bylaws and articles of incorporation, we have a 7-member board, which has 2 seats for the state, the DOT Northern Region Director and DEC Air Quality Division Director. We have 2 seats for the borough, one for the borough mayor and one for a borough assembly member to be selected by borough assembly. We have 2 city of Fairbanks seats, one of which is the city mayor and the other is a city council member selected by the Fairbanks City Council. And then we have 1 seat for the city of North Pole, which is the mayor. And specifically in section 1, it states that each member is authorized to have 1 vote. If the makeup of this board is changed, we would have to reflect that in a change to our operating agreement. So there's not much we can do here with section 1, other than, as I mentioned in the previous meeting during our peer exchange down in Anchorage with Minnesota and North Dakota. For those 2 particular states, the state seats for all their MPOs are ex officio. So they get to participate at the board level, but they're not entertained to vote at the board level. So I don't know that that's something that our policy board would necessarily be interested in, but it was something that we learned during that peer exchange and how things are done differently in other states. And then there's annual elections for chair and chair. The director is basically serves as to staff the policy board meetings, to serve in a secretary role, but also I think it's necessarily listed here, but I'm basically also the treasurer for the 501c3 nonprofit. Chair is at, on the next page, if the chair is absent, the vice chair steps in to be chair of the policy board. Policy board meetings follow the points of order and procedure and Robert's Rules of Order. That special meetings or work sessions can be scheduled at the request of the board chair. And that the chair will execute on behalf of the policy board all documents it authorizes and approves. So any discussions on the members and officers section of the bylaws? Yes, Don.
Under section 3, I know these were put together when Fast Planning was a smaller organization.
Yep.
And this just says the transportation planner / assistant. And I'm not sure who that's referring to. Do we want to, now that staff has grown, not by name, but by position title, somehow differentiate between Corey and Olivia?
Well, they have the same title, they're both transportation planner.
So does that mean either of them could step in?
Yes, that's the way I would prefer it.
Okay.
To have flexibility, so that could potentially be changed to a transportation planner or fast planning is designated. Serve in the absence of the executive director.
Yeah.
Get rid of the word assistant.
And then if I
Yes, go ahead.
Under section 6, it says the chair shall nominate with the executive tech committee, all committee members and their respective chairs. I'm not really sure, that might have been a holdover from when the MPO was first formed.
Yeah, that's not something that's at all functionally in practice.
Right, right.
At
So
this
I was wondering if perhaps we could make a note of that and strike it. Or change it somehow so it reflects what the current state of practice is.
Okay. So again, we can come back to these individually after we've had public comment and motions can be made, but we're just making note of these to take a look at here in a moment. All right, any other discussion on Article 2? Okay, hearing none, moving on to Article 3. This relates to policy board meetings that they will be held in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. They will be held monthly. And open to the public. Section 3 there notes that myself as secretary, the executive director will prepare the agenda for their meetings. The special meetings can be held at the call of the chair. A quorum for the policy board is 4 members, and for any action or any motion to be approved at board meetings, you must have 4 positive votes. That's section 5. Section 6, that if at a policy board meeting, if we don't establish quorum, the meeting shall not be held. That roll call vote would be called and all matters being voted on by the board unless it passes without objection. So it still gives them flexibility to ask if anyone's opposed or to do a roll call vote, which is generally determined by the chair, which method he or she would like to choose. Any questions or comments on Article 3 relating to the meeting format? Hearing none, Article 4. It again restates that the secretary and myself as executive director will prepare the agenda for the meeting. Of course, similar to technical committee, I prepare the draft agenda, I issue a call for agenda items with a deadline, and then after that deadline, we advertise, we set the agenda and do our newspaper ads and online public notices. And that section 2 there, that any member of the board may ask to add an item to the agenda for discussion or action, and that's in practice currently. So it's not just the chair, they can ask for things to be added or removed to the agenda, any board member can do that. That agenda items must be submitted no later than close of business 1 week prior to the meeting. We do set those deadlines and adhere to that. And that informational items that come up may be presented at the policy board such that, but if it's not in our newspaper advertisement or online public notices, they cannot take action on that item during the meeting, but informational items can be presented even if they're not on the agenda. There's no action taken, so. Any questions or comments on Article 4? Okay, hearing none. Article 5, Section 1 just outlines the main agenda items as on the agenda. This is the same list of agenda items that we use for our technical committee as well. Public comment will be accepted for all old and new business items. And then Section 3 on the next page, the length of the public comment period is determined by the chair. So the chair is allowed to allow a set, say, a 3-minute time limit or a 5-minute time limit on public comment, or allow a member of the public to speak at length if the chair would like to give them more floor time. So it's up to the call of the chair for the length of public testimony for a commenter. Questions or comments? Yes, Don?
I know it's come up a few times recently here, but do we want to suggest a limitation of 5 minutes or 3 minutes per comment? At least something for them to think about.
Not in my personal opinion, but I also know that at least one board member would like to see a time limit and another board member would not like to see a time limit. So I guess I'd leave this up to the board to make that decision. So in practice here for the technical committee, generally I afford speakers as much time as they would like. Unless we have, say, 20 people signed up to speak for public testimony that meeting. So that our meeting doesn't go over time, we will set a time when that occurs. Okay, moving on to Article 6, records. All of our board and committee meetings are recorded by staff, maintained as a public record. All of our meeting recordings are even posted on our website at this time, as well as the signed action items and signed meeting minutes from all of our meetings. So all records are not just recorded and kept in the office, they're actually on our website for public inspection at any time. Yes, Don.
Well, that was my comment on this. We want to include that in the verbiage here of the article, that all meetings will be recorded and posted online on Fastway page. Along with meeting minutes and stuff.
Yeah, to bring this up to speed with current practice, we could, at the beginning, we could say the minutes and recordings of all board and committee meetings shall be maintained as a public record in the coordinator's office and Fastway's website.
Technically, I'm not.
We'll probably just delete the word coordinators, just in the MPO office. Yeah, John.
Do you want to give a time frame with that too for when it would be uploaded? So people can expect to when to see it?
I think that'd be good. What do you all think is a reasonable time frame?
2 days, whatever they can do.
I mean, it would definitely, we need to see business days because.
Okay.
Sometimes we still don't have signed action items by the Friday. And then back.
What about the minutes? Sometimes minutes, they take a little longer than.
Right, if we'd have to wait
Well,
till next month.
We signed the previous minutes at the, like, I'll be signing the March minutes at this meeting that I'll go online.
Okay,
So, but it is obviously a month until the meeting minutes are.
so it's a month in arrears, it's when they
Yep.
get posted.
Yep.
So maybe.
But the recordings of the meeting as it occurred are posted generally within a couple business days.
Yeah, we actually have an auto upload to YouTube now, that seems to be functioning. So, I mean, within an hour of the meeting, they're usually on YouTube.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean.
Within 2 business days, I mean, our meetings are on Wednesdays. So then they'd be posted by Friday afternoon sometime.
Yep, that's reasonable.
Okay. All right, I made that note. Good comments. Okay, Article 6. Related to committees. All committees shall consist of at least 3 members. Members of the board shall be non-voting. Shall be a non-voting member of each committee. Committee meetings may be called at the request of the chair. Or at the request of 2 members. All meetings must be noticed in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. This is a little bit, I guess, awkward of an article, because I'm not necessarily sure what it refers to. If it's subcommittees of the board or subcommittees of any other committee. As we get into the technical committee next, and the bylaws are silent on the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, Project Enhancement Committee, and the Seasonal Mobility Task Force. We simply have those committees established in policy. There are policies and procedure document and not in bylaws. So I don't know if we want to modify this section to speak directly to our other advisory committees and how those are established. Policies and procedures document outside of bylaws. If we did that, we'd probably relocate this article to after the article on the technical committee. I guess for clarity, we need to know if this means subcommittees. Or if these are extra advisory committees. Okay, go ahead, Don.
The way I read it is section 1 basically says all committees, so. Have covered the BPAC and the PD. And I don't know that we want to delineate each of those in here because it. You know, it may take away some flexibility.
Right.
In the future. And I don't know that we necessarily want to add subcommittees to this either. Because I think those are more meant for, you know, specific. You know, looking at specific issues. Projects, you know, a subcommittee just to kind of get into the weeds of a certain project, and then once that's over, the subcommittee disbands, so. I guess I would say, I wouldn't necessarily want to see all the subcommittees have to go through all this, for each thing, especially like, noticing and that sort of thing for subcommittee. Particularly if you have a subcommittee that would not necessarily have any kind of quorum. Or, excuse me, representation from, the tech committee or the policy board. I think it would be, I think in some ways it could make this pretty cumbersome.
Any other comments or thoughts in this section? Sounds like we need to take a new look at it to figure out exactly what it pertains to. Maybe not add additional detail, but maybe simplify this. Go ahead, John.
I don't know if it's for this section or miscellaneous, but, when we plan to be absent, is there a block of text in here that describes who has the authority or how we can set a replacement for a meeting coming up? Say I want to be absent and send Al Beck in my position on this committee and have a vote.
So the only committee we do that for is the technical committee. So
Okay.
we
Is that
call-
in here though, or is that just kind of what we do?
That's in the next article. I don't know if. Yeah, let me look for it here. But yes, we do allow proxies or substitutes at
Right.
technical committee. And so if that's not specifically called out for the technical committee, we definitely would want to add that.
That's my.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to Article 8 here, and I'm reading it real quick to see if that's specifically listed. And if not, we'll make note of that.
And then does that count as an absence or not?
See it in Article 8. Somebody else does. So the comment would be to add a new section covering committee member substitutes. Basically, we would be stating that they are allowed and that a written communication be provided to the executive director
I'd recommend,
in
yeah.
advance of the meeting.
Yes, a communication to you, written or maybe.
Or, yeah,
verbal.
yeah.
And then. I don't know. if it
Yeah, I
needs-
mean, it could be a phone call, it could be an email. We don't need a signed letter. But basically, what I need to know is that somebody like Don Galligan is sitting in at the meeting and authorized to vote on behalf of the county. Since it's his seat.
Correct, and you knew beforehand, it didn't just show up.
Correct. Yeah, I knew.
It just
Don-
came in
I knew
and said-
beforehand, yeah. And I'm just gonna say like in advance of the meeting, because sometimes I'll get a call at 10 a.m. like, hey, I was supposed to be here, but my kid's sick and, I'm not gonna be able to make it, whatever it may be. So I wouldn't necessarily want to set a time limit on that. Circumstances come up.
What about, maybe that person has to tell you?
Oh, yes, it needs to be the seat holder.
Yes.
Yeah. I can wordsmith that, but I think that'd be a good addition, because that's how we do this in practice. All right, in this section, we have had previous discussion about certain technical committee seats being ex officio. That change, of course, was not made by the policy board. But do we want to revisit it? Of course, committee members can abstain at any time from vote or. And we do allow certain seats, to have multiple excused absences and they're still on the committee. So. Then I'm fine with keeping it that way. And again, in this article here, this allows staff to serve in the chair and vice chair positions. But is clear that if the staff member serves as chair and vice chair, we don't get a vote. It's just the committee members as shown in section 4. And then quorum for the committee is 7. Even though the committee is quite large, we have 17 filled seats at this time. Or maybe 16 filled seats at this time, but quorum is 7. So that's not even a majority. But we did discuss that at one point and I believe agreed to leave it at 7. That's in section 10 there. If there's any discussion on that. Right. Anything else for the committee? Yeah, go ahead, Don.
Jackson, I believe section 11 has a typo.
Okay.
It says, voting members of technical will comply with Article 10 and Article 11, policy boards regarding conflict of interest and ethics decisions. I believe that's Article 9 and Article
9 and 10. Good catch. Okay. All right, any other suggestions for the technical committee article? Yes, Don?
Under section 8, again, I would say, like we did before, A, transportation planner of fast planning. Instead of B, transportation.
Yep. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, Article 9 there. We're gonna skip over this one. Conflict of interest, the language included here in Article 9 is standard language that the IRS needs us to have in our bylaws for our 501c3 nonprofit. And so we've had multiple attorneys look at this conflict of interest language when we stood up our nonprofit. And provided that, I think we should keep this language intact with regard to our tax exempt status. So moving on to Article 10 then. Oh, yes, Don, you got something?
Just a question,
Yes.
under section 7, it talks about annual statements.
Yes,
Are those actually made annually?
they are.
They are.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a form that each policy board member must sign annually,
Okay.
stating that they have read and understand our conflict of interest policy. So, anyways, yes, that is in practice.
Okay,
You haven't signed
just wanted to
annually.
make sure.
Yep. Okay, Article 10, Policy Board Code of Ethics. This one does need an update. Our bylaws currently state that we are adopting the American Planning Association's ethical principles in planning dated May 1992. That was 30 years later that ethics, the Code of Ethics policy has been updated by APA. It was updated in 2021. And so I think we need to revise this to reflect the most current ethics policy from the APA. So I was going to make that update. But basically, we don't have our own written ethics policy. We're relying on other planning organizations utilizing theirs. Yep, done.
So it does say that it's available in attachment 1.
Yes.
I didn't notice in online or anywhere where attachment 1 was actually attached.
think it is, but it should be.
Yeah.
So,
So I guess
I
the
like
question
that.
I would have is if we're going to update it, is that something then that policy board should be able to read and debate?
yes, they should. Yep. And we can include a copy of that in the policy board packet. We'll actually attach it to the document attached so they can take a look at it. So, and I'm sure there's other ethics policies out there that they could utilize and do with the American Planning Association, but historically for our MPO, this is the ethics policy that we've adhered to. But that's something for debate as well. Okay, Article 11 miscellaneous. We've got a provision here in section 1 for minor changes to documents that the chair is can authorize minor changes to document and not have to cycle those through the policy board for approval prior to those minor corrections. You may want to add something that if this occurs, the policy board is notified at the next meeting of those minor revisions. Francie? Standards of conduct. Standards of conduct, policy board should adopt and maintain written policy prescribing standard conduct for its involvement in litigation or potential litigation. I don't believe we have that. So that might be something to discuss with the board. Then attendance, it says attendance shall be in person or telephonically. We probably should add in person, virtually, or telephonically. And then this says if any member has 3 consecutive unexcused absences or shall be caused for an alternative representative designated for their organization. This is not something that we've exercised in the past, but it's there in case there's a need to modify a seat. At least there's something in the bylaws that triggers that option should someone want to exercise it. Then the last section, section number 5. This basically just states that for our city council seat and borough assembly seat with those members, we confirm. So the members so confirmed will be seated at the regular meeting. So annually, the assembly picks their seat assignments for all committees. And so after the assembly's action on that seat appointment, that assembly member can serve at the next meeting, the same thing with the city council. So any comments or discussion on the miscellaneous article? I mean, section 5 could potentially be relocated to members and officers probably gets rid. Okay. And then the last section, Article 12, amendments. Citizens amendments to the bylaws. The rules may be amended, rescinded, or supplemented by the policy board, such that amendments are presented in writing at a regular or special meeting, called for that particular purpose, and action is taken at their subsequent regular meeting. Okay. So any other comments, or perhaps there's something that's not in the bylaws that you think that should be added that is not already there? be revised. Okay. Hearing none, let's go ahead and open this up for, public comment. Is there any public comment on proposed revisions to past planning bylaws? Seeing any this time, so go ahead and close the public comment period.
Patrice raised her
Oh, Patrice, go ahead, Patrice.
Thank you. I'd like to say that I agree with the chair's proposal for public comment, and I think it's very sound and fair for timing.
Thank you, Patrice. All right, any other public comment today? Okay, not hearing any, so we'll move on to a motion on this item. I guess for purposes of discussion, does someone want to make a very general motion to advance the suggested changes that we just discussed to the policy board for consideration?
So,
Thanks, Don. Is there a second? John, go ahead. Or sorry, John,
A
a second. John and Tardis is a second. Okay. So we'll open it up for discussion. I'll speak to that suggested motion just real quick. So if this passes, basically the changes as we just discussed, I would, I'll make those modifications to the document and track changes, so they're all highlighted. And then provide that draft to the policy board at their April 16th meeting. But if you would like to, folks can make any amendments as well to debate any items if you wish. Good job.
There was a lot of minor
Mhm.
changes, a lot from Dawn and like a couple from me. Did anyone else have any? You had some? Could I suggest you send it to whoever suggested some changes to review it prior to policy board?
The only person that requested the review of the bylaws is our board chair, Jerry Cleaver.
Same, like,
Oh.
can you provide sort of summary of edits to the people that provided their comments, right?
I think someone should review the track changes prior to policy board.
Oh, sure. So are you saying that since you and Don made comments that I'll do the track changes version and send it to you in advance to take a look at for a few days prior to it being included in the policy board packet to make sure I got the language that as you intended?
Yes,
Okay, I can do that. Yes.
and if it's not as intended, then what?
Then you let me know.
Okay.
And I'll, because yeah, I want to meet the intent of your edits. If I miss the mark, you let me know what the intent was or how you'd like to see it written differently, and I'll include your language. Not my language.
Yeah, I just wanted one round of checks before it went to the policy board.
Sure thing. Okay, right, so this open. Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, here and none, anyone opposed to advancing these minor edits to the policy board for their consideration in April 16th. Okay, hearing none, we'll consider that motion approved. And again, I will commit to making these edits and track changes and then emailing them to Don and John and Curtis for review prior to including in the policy board packet. Okay, moving on to our last action item here today, the letter to the US EPA Congressional Delegation on Transportation Sanctions and the Clean Air Act. This is begins on page 56 in your packet. For background here, Our board chair, Jerry Clayworth, asked the Fast Planning staff author a new letter containing much of the information that we've sent in previous letters to the EPA, to the new EPA administrator and new EPA regional administrator, as well as our congressional delegation, in consideration that we have a new representative, with Peltola being replaced by Nick Begich. With our request for both the EPA and our congressional delegation to take a look at the highway sanctions that are included in the Clean Air Act, to provide a potential exemption in law and in corresponding regulations for communities that where on-road mobile source emissions do not make a significant contribution to the air quality problem. So again, the request to write this letter came from our board chair. I did my best here on pages 56 and 57 to fulfill that request. I'm still not entirely clear if this is exactly the direction that we would like to go, but I did kind of, rather than simply write a letter requesting the changes to law and corresponding regulation, I did write this letter with the idea that myself and a couple members of our interior delegation would travel to Washington, D.C. to discuss the topic so that we can look at options for these changes. The specific section in U.S. code is on page 57. You'll see the bulleted list there to the kind of the middle of the page, and the corresponding regulations where these changes might occur. But there may be other sections of regulations or other rules that we may want to take a look at. Basically, I mean, I've worked in transportation for many years, but I'm definitely not an air quality expert on how functionally this would all work. So this is really just my first attempt at pulling something together that met the intent of the request from our board chair, but certainly open to any input on this letter or changes in direction for the tact that we move forward with this. So with that, I guess I'll open it up for questions. I don't know that this letter is necessarily complete or entirely the direction that we want to go, but it is my first attempt, and I put my pencil down. This is here for your reaction. You see, Nick, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Jackson, and thanks for working on the draft. It is definitely a complex and nuanced set of statutes and regulations and administrative law to try to wade through. My question is, can you explain the intent of the policy board in this letter? Because I think that could help clarify what could potentially need to be changed. And you mentioned that you might not understand the intent, but maybe, clarifying that to the extent that you can could be helpful.
Yes, so my understanding of the intent is that, and this is based on previous statements from previous letters from Fast Planning, that basically in simple words, the punishment on our federal transportation dollars doesn't fit, the crime that occurred, since the significant contribution to our air quality problem is from residential home heating, wood smoke, but it's not transportation emissions. So the intent is to, I guess, make it clear again to the congressional delegation and then the new administrators of the EPA that we don't believe the highway sanctions, that highway sanctions should be applied to our area, because our motor vehicle emissions are not the problem. So it's the disconnect between the punishment and the crime is what I have been asked to re-highlight for some of these new individuals in DC.
Thank you for that clarification, Jackson. Can I offer some comments at this time, or should that wait until a little bit later?
Let's limit it to questions now.
Okay.
I do believe we have at least one person signed up for public testimony, but. So, any other questions?
No. Well, no other questions from me. Other folks on the technical committee might have some, though.
All right, any other committee member questions? Okay, not seeing any at this time, so let's go ahead and open it up to public comment. And Patrice, I see you have your hand up, so you have the floor.
All right, thank you very much. Boy, I agree with Nick and applaud you for attempting a first draft of such a difficult letter to write. I'd like to just add some things that are a little technical, and also some things that are a little general. So in your letter, you have that 6.8% of the emissions contribution is the mobile sources. And I understand where you're coming from in the punishment versus the crime. But I don't know that 6.8%, I have some questions about how that might have been calculated. Maybe Nick can shed some light on it. But what mobile count do you actually have? And what technology does ADEC apply to directly monitor mobile emissions? We've had those discussions before, and it's based on a model. But how do you make an accurate model if you're using old information or certainly not the latest information, and you don't have any way to exactly monitor emissions? You mentioned in there that you'd like to have a meeting with different officials in Washington, D.C. to discuss that. And I would respectfully submit that Citizens for Clean Air should also be invited to D.C. to be at that table, because we're not just against air pollution, we're all for solutions as well. Our motto is clean air and warm homes. I do want to ask where, this might not go into the letter, but where were all the concerned people when time after time wood smoke problem was brought up and solutions were proposed only to be shot down? For example, outdoor wood boilers. And who spoke up in support of clean air? And we've been doing this for 15 years, and time after time after time, Citizens for Clean Air has come before every body, assembly, council, at the state and local level to suggest solutions. We sent 17 solutions to the legislature that were viable solutions to keep people warm and have alternatives to wood burning, and or adjusted wood burning, such as absolutely only dry wood and moisture meters and all that. But it just got shoved aside. People were working on it, but it never seemed to register at the state level that, oh my goodness. Well, you wonder why EPA would take the tactic in the law of targeting, for lack of a better word, transportation departments. Well, it's because EPA cannot come into a community and come into people's homes and do any sort of regulation. Nobody would want that. They work at the state level. And our state, frankly, for at least the last 8 years and before, has not really cared about the air quality in Fairbanks from my perspective. I think the dedicated people at ADEC and whatnot, they work very hard to do the best they can. But the state as a whole, in a political situation, really hasn't taken the sense of urgency they could have. And so I will finish up here in just a little bit. The reason for the Clean Air Act is for the protection of public health, the protection of people. And when we breathe in polluted air, especially PM 2.5, from whatever source it comes from, and by the way, mobile emissions carry other toxics in their emissions, we are affected by inflammation. Inflammation or swelling affects every disease process. And we know from current research that dementia is on the rise, premature birth, cognitive function, especially in children, and exacerbation of all lung and heart diseases. What would this committee have the EPA do to make to motivate the state in a much better way to clean up the air. This has been the way they do it because it's the only thing that seems to catch the attention of people. As soon as they realize that jobs and other things, which are very important, are at risk, well, then all of a sudden everybody just complaining like they never heard about it at all. And so I guess I'm frustrated after having spent 16 years of my life caring about public health and about what happens when people, when you're choking on the emergency room table, or you can't remember what you did yesterday, or you pass away at an earlier age than you normally would have. We can't pin that on air quality, but we know one thing for sure: it didn't make it any better. And the research says otherwise. It says we can pin it on these things. So I guess my question would be, if you don't want DOT sanctions or conformity freezes, what would you have done to enforce or increase or make the law better? And with that, I'll be quiet. The state was responsible for helping protect jobs and people, and they didn't do it, meaning the state government.
Thank you for your testimony, Patrice. I guess I'll just ask if are there any questions for Patrice from committee members? Okay, I'm not seeing any at this time. So thank you again, Patrice, for your testimony.
And thank you for hearing it. I appreciate you.
Yes. Okay, any other public comment today on this item? Okay, not hearing any. We'll go ahead and close the public comment opportunity. I'm now going to open the floor for a motion on the letter. Then we can entertain further discussion.
Yeah, Jackson, this is Nick. I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, go ahead, Nick.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend to the policy board to postpone approval of the letter for at least 1 month to allow fast planning staff to review and strengthen the requested changes in law, rule, and regulation with subject matter experts.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Is there a second to that motion? Okay, second by Don. Okay, Nick, did you want to speak to your motion?
Yes, yes, I do. I'd like to speak to the motion and provide some context. First of all, I do want to note that there's a pretty big difference in administrative law between statutes and regulations, and both are mentioned in the letter. Statutes are federal law that are passed by Congress, and regulations are made by agencies such as EPA and other federal agencies that provide the detail for how to implement the statutes. And I think we need to keep that in context with this letter. First of all, nothing in statute supports that sanctions are meant to contribute to emission reductions. So there's nothing there that really supports that the punishment has to fit the crime, so to speak. And the sanctions and conformity freezes, furthermore, in the Clean Air Act are penalties. And really, they are in place to provide the incentives for states to implement a meaningful control strategy. And so they were never really intended to provide blanket progress for every non-attainment area. And so when you're looking at the sanctions, just want to keep that in mind. Another comment is that if a sanction is to be removed, then a replacement sanction should be suggested so that the intent of that is not lost. Another comment is that the Clean Air Act 179 or US Code 7509 that's mentioned in the letter, those do focus on sanctions, and changes to that statute wouldn't necessarily provide relief to the conformity freeze. So I'm not sure if it fully meets the intent. And my last, or two more comments really. One is that changing US statute does require an act of Congress, and in the Senate, right now. You need 60 members to move that out of debate. And so there's not a high probability of success. And I think that there are more strategic ways if you want to have a better probability of success and to make meaningful changes. I think focusing on approvability, because Clean Air Act Section 179 and 40 CFR Part 93 that trigger the penalties that you're talking about, they're only triggered if the plan is found not to be approvable. And there could be other sections of federal code, such as 40 CFR 51.1000, that you could focus on specific changes for approvability, and you could petition for a rulemaking with some common sense changes that would likely see broad support, and that has a much higher chance of success. And so to wrap up my comment on this, I think there could be, this could benefit from some time and technical experts to craft the letter so it meets the intent and has a higher probability of success.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that. That is what I'm looking for, some help with this letter. There are people that are a lot smarter than me that could help connect some dots. Okay, further discussion on the motion. So again, the motion is basically asking the board to postpone advance the letter for a month so that I can reach out to some subject matter experts to kind of retailor the letter more appropriately. Okay, any further discussion? Comments or questions? Okay, not hearing any further discussion. I'm not hearing any opposition or controversy on this item with the motion that was made. So I'll just ask if there's any committee member opposed to that motion to postpone this month. Okay, seeing none, we'll consider that motion approved. That takes us to informational items. I included in your packet beginning on page 59. I just want to highlight for you my monthly update on federal actions potentially impacting NPOs. There is an article from T4 America included in your packet. This was actually shared to me by Don Galligan. And what I wanted to highlight for you, because it is somewhat concerning to me, is the figures on pages 61 and 62. So this memo kind of covers some of the competitive grant awards through USDOT that are under review currently. Some funding programs have been revoked, some are being rescinded, some are being reviewed, and they may be advanced forward. But across 3 funding categories that have been made available to the state of Alaska, this was kind of shocking that on the first figure there for the PROTECT program, which is resiliency projects, per capita, there's more money that was provided to the state of Alaska that has not been obligated on any project to date than any other state. So it's potential that these PROTECT funds may be rescinded, and this makes the appearance that we might have stand the most to lose because we've not been that proactive in programming and obligating the funding for the PROTECT program. And then on the next page, related to the NEVI program, our National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, and the Carbon Reduction Program, Alaska is also the highest per capita and remaining unobligated funds across those 2 fund categories. Now, I have not heard that across these 3 fund categories that the funds have officially been rescinded or officially revoked. But it does appear Alaska stands to lose quite a bit of funding just because, again, we haven't been proactive in obligating this funding on a statewide basis. So in any event, that's of concern to me because this could represent an opportunity lost. But we are getting updates kind of on a daily basis from the from what's happening out in Washington DC. There's a lot that's up in the air, a lot of uncertainty. But this is of particular concern to me. And then page 63, this is the kind of weekly update from the National Association of MPOs. They sent out a weekly email with their updates from their communications with our federal partners in Washington DC. Just a couple things to note is that, you know, one of the new administration's goals is hard infrastructure. And so some of these programs, like I just described there, those are being looked at and flagged. On this particular page here, even road diets may also become a flagged activity, just like electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Bicycle infrastructure projects has also been flagged. So, and then page 67, there in the courts, there has been a lot of lawsuits filed. So a lot of the executive orders are being reviewed by the courts. But there is a pretty concerted effort across many organizations across the U.S. To, I guess, unpause the disbursement of these transportation funds that were granted underneath the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act. So we'll see if those lawsuits do prevail. But there's, again, a lot of federal funding categories that are in limbo at this time. And I'm sure there's folks working on a new transportation bill in Congress, and we may see a very different landscape as far as our federal highway funding in coming years. Anyways, I'll let you all kind of read through that on your own time. I just wanted to highlight a few of those things that caught my attention. Any questions on the monthly update of federal actions impacting MPOs? Okay, seeing none, moving on to item 9B, our obligations and offsets, which begins on page 70. Our obligations did go up slightly from last month. We're now up to 18% obligated. Really moving forward here, we are the big uptick in obligations will be when the Fast Improvement Program goes out to bid. As well as Yankovich Miller Hill when that project goes out to bid. And there's the Fast Improvement Program is contingent upon TIP Amendment number 1 being approved by our policy board, which is scheduled for April 16th. But I also know there are some outstanding match and maintenance agreements for that. So we'll see when that actually gets out to bid, but we're all working hard to try to deliver that collectively. And then Yankovich Miller Hill. We had heard that this may go out to bid late summer and be constructed next year, but I have heard that there's been some progress made on the right-of-way phase where the courts have approved the right-of-way acquisition. So things are moving a little bit more quickly than previously on that project. So we'll see if there is or is not any groundbreaking this year, but there has been a little bit of a schedule acceleration there, which I was happy to hear about. But still, no promises. Likely, the majority of that work will be done in 2026. And then page 72, as far as offsets are concerned, we've got our balances increased. We have about $400,000 available to us for project increases and any change orders experienced this summer. And page 73, this list hasn't changed for our upcoming obligations for project closures. Any questions on obligations and offsets? Okay, hearing none, we don't have any other issues today, but so we'll move on to committee member comments. Any committee member comments or announcements? Twice. Okay, hearing none, I'll ask if there's a motion to adjourn. Thank you, John. Is there a second? Walker? Any opposed to adjourn? All right, hearing none, we are adjourned at 1:44 p.m.
All right, thanks.